we are focusing on tools and technique principles to help you guys with, when it comes to drinking less or resetting or stopping. Everyone has, looking at everyone's goals within the group, some people just want to drink less and they want to go from, 5 or 6 days of drinking to just the weekend. We have other people where it's completely, they just want to be sober and it's all about sobriety for them. And some other people, well, they want to take a break and for 90 days, and then from there they'll make a decision when they're completely cleaned out and alcohol isn't influencing them. And that's a really good strategy as well. So you can, you have that feeling of being alcohol free for 3 months, and that gives you a really good track record of your day to day, how you go without alcohol, when you have to go to social events, and no doubt within those 90 days you will get, you'll get triggered and you'll get overwhelmed, and the stress levels will go up and they will go down. So it's just navigating that. But tonight is all about tools and techniques, and I just didn't want to just say, oh, here you go, here's the tools and techniques, and just go through it, because I've put all of these inside the group. So you've got access to this stack deck, which has got over 40 tools and techniques at your disposal. So you use them, when you need them. And the reason I put these together is because my clients, from the past didn't know what to do in the heat of the moment. So these tools are there not just to use when you need them, but to use them when you don't need them, and to practice them, and to get really good at knowing an emotion. What do I do? And it's really ticking me off. So you're recognizing it, you're allowing it, you're investigating it, just like it's a knock on the door, and then you nurture it, with self-compassion, and you let that it will only last for 90 seconds chemically in the body, and then it'll dissipate. So it's knowing what to use and when to use it, right? So you've got access to the stack deck, and if I have time, I will get into more of these techniques. But what I wanted to show you first was, why in the first place do we want to worry about having tools and techniques? And the biggest reason is being able to regulate your nervous system and your anxiety and your overwhelm and your disconnect, when it's occurring. So you're not dwelling and staying in those, in those states for long. The reason that we stay in states for longer than what's required is because we're ruminating over them. So the other beautiful thing about having tools and techniques is that it stops that rumination, and it's like a circuit breaker. It actually, it's a pattern interrupt, where it interrupts your thought processes, right? And it actually gets you focusing on, on something else, which is getting back into what I call the window of tolerance. Now, this is what I wanted to touch on first before we get into the tools and techniques. And for people that drink, for people that are, that are drinking regularly, there comes a pattern where, they get home and they just disconnect, or they numb out, or they've got low energy, right? And then they use alcohol to, to take those feelings away, right? And so that's called a hypoarousal state, where, we've had a big day, we just want to get home, we want to get into some beers or get into some red wine or whatever the case may be, and we want to disconnect, we just want to numb out, we just want to forget about the day, okay? And then what happens is, we get into 2 or 3 beers, and then we go, stuff it. I've had 2 or 3, 4 or 5. I may as well finish the 6-pack, right? So it doesn't really matter, And then, we do that, and then, we go to bed and we don't have the best night's sleep. We're processing the alcohol at, say, 3 o'clock in the morning when the liver's processing the alcohol. And we wake up, we don't have the best night's sleep. And then we wake up and, there's a bit of overwhelm, or, you're easily triggered, or there's a bit of anxiety happening because you've got a really big day and you want to be sharp, and, you've got this lingering, little bit of a headache, or, that, what you did last night wasn't the best thing for you, and you're not feeling the best about yourself. And so you're on a little bit of on edge. Now, when I'm talking about this is not every single person with every single scenario, but this is a typical way that people live with their nervous system. And it's very, very subtle. So the window of tolerance, right, that's our natural state, where within the window of tolerance with our nervous system, we're experiencing, elation, then we're experiencing a low, then we're experiencing something, grand, something happy, something joyful. And then, we experience some bad news or stress or pressure during the day, but we're handling it. We're not going to an external stimuli, to help us, right? We're handling it. And this is the way that we were when we were kids, and we would, come up with an obstacle, and we would deal with it. We would have parents coming in, or our guardians, or the, teachers coming in and helping us out, right? And so this is what was happening, okay? And a lot of the time what was happening when we were kids also is that, things were happening to us, and there were a lot of open loops, and, sometimes they didn't get closed. And then because that happened when we were a child, we get in trouble later on in life as well, either through having open loops that weren't closed, or traumatic events that weren't processed, or there wasn't, a concluded meaning towards it. So we go from, a typical drinker, right, goes from going from like a hyper arousal state to a hypoarousal state, so from the morning and the day, we start to think about having a drink, and then we go down to a hypoarousal state where there's a low energy and we're disconnecting, and, we're not really being present with anyone, right? And then, we have too many drinks at night, and then we wake up, and then, we get into like a state of hyperarousal where we need to get into the day and everything like that. But what's happening to the nervous system is it's going up and down with these extremes. Okay, so that's why having tools and techniques to get you back into the window of tolerance, and in a homeostasis state is imperative, because that window of tolerance, by the way, is if you don't get into that tolerant zone often enough, it starts to narrow, and it gets harder and harder to stay in there, so you end up in these hyper states, either in an arousal, or, hyper arousal or hypo arousal. So that's why I'm talking about tools and techniques, in this context. Now, it's really important, by the way, that you choose the right tool as well. Like, for example, if you are in a very low state and low energy state, like, you don't necessarily want to be getting into like a really deep meditation where you're not moving your body, right? You want something that's going to get you out of that state and increase the energy, right? But if you're in a hyper arousal state where your thoughts are going a million miles an hour, and you've got a little bit of anxiety, and the blood's going to your limbs because you're in fight or flight mode, then a thinking strategy, right, like reflection or journaling, isn't probably the best thing to do either, right? Because you want to be calming down. You want to use the body to calm things down. So that's the other thing. When you're choosing a tool, and there's 48 tools in the stack deck currently, you want to be choosing a tool in correlation to the state that you're in. So I hope that makes sense. But, if you're heightened, you want to be lowering it. If you're low energy or disconnected, you want to be heightening it. Okay. So I'll give you an example, and I'll give you 3 examples for each. Okay. So this first one is downshifting. So we're downshifting, and say, for example, we are feeling a little bit anxious, or the mind is racing a little bit, and you just want to calm your farm down, right? These are 3 tools to get you back into the window of tolerance in that homeostasis state, okay? And they're not going to be applicable if you are, in certain situations, but, there's more than these tools, but this is an example, and I'll explain the tools now. So the tool number 1 is all about a nature reset. And this is a beautiful thing to do in general, right? But what you do is you step outside and you let nature shrink your problems. If you go for a walk to a big park or a big water body, like the beach or the forest, or whatever it is, right? Or even at night where the stars are out and you can see the Milky Way, the vastness of the Milky Way, or the vastness of the ocean, or the vastness of the forest, right? That starts to get you feeling like, wow, I'm so small on this tiny little planet that's rotating around, the sun. And, the sun is just one star, and there's billions and trillions of stars. And so what happens is you start to connect with nature, and you realize that your big problem starts to shrink because you start to shrink. Okay. And it's just hanging out with nature and its vibration as well, and so it's a really, really beautiful practice to do in general, and just not judging anything and not thinking too hard, but just noticing the vastness of everything, and how, we're just this one small, body in the vastness, and everything starts to shrink. Okay. The next tool is the mental time travel, right? And this is using visualization, but using it for the future. Okay. So if you are in a situation where your mind's racing and you go, oh my God, I can't believe this has happened. What am I going to do? I said to myself, that I was going to follow through and I didn't do it. You just got to take a break and you ask yourself, how will I feel about this tomorrow, in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, in 10 years from now? How will I feel about this? Think about any dire situation that you had years ago, right? Or something that was really, that wasn't pleasant at all, right? And when you bring it back, bring back the memory, right? It's not gonna. I mean, just a. I'm not talking about a 9/11 event, but I'm talking about something that happened, right? There would have been something, lessons out of that. There would have been some positives out of that. Maybe sometimes you can even laugh about it, the way that, it panned out and whatever happened, right? I know for myself personally, when I got divorced, it was terrible. Right? It's the reason that I'm here. The reason that I'm talking to you guys, right? Is because I got divorced. So when I was divorced or getting divorced, and and there was young children involved, so it was it was really hard. I thought the world was going to end, but looking back on it now, the kids are really resilient, and I love them dearly. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because my ex-wife has gone on her trajectory, right? And I've gone on mine, and they're completely different. We're completely different people. And sometimes chapters have to end for others to open. And so, thinking about it, how will you feel in a week, in a month, in a year, really takes the edge, takes the grip of the situation, and calms the nervous system down. The final one, from being in a hyper arousal state into getting into the window of tolerance, is box breathing. And there's different variations on box breathing. Everyone's heard about breathing techniques, and there's different. But the one that I mentioned inside the in the stack deck is the box breathing, where you're breathing in for 4, you're holding for 4, and you're breathing out for 4, you're holding for 4, you're breathing in for 4. So it's like 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Okay. And to put it on steroids, to put it on overcharge, like overdrive, so your body knows that it really wants to relax and it's following your lead. You do like a 4 breath, right? Where you breathe in for 4 and you hold for 4. And when you breathe in for 4, you're breathing in as much oxygen as possible, like you're just about to go for a deep dive, right? You breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, but then you breathe out for 8 as much as you can. Or I've got here a 2, 2, and 6, but you're breathing out twice. It's taking twice as long as it takes to breathe in. As soon as you breathe out on the 8th breath, you hold for 4, then you breathe in for 4. It really gives you a beautiful reset of doing maybe 6 rounds of that. Okay, so they were the 3 tools for going from a really anxious hyper arousal state into the window of tolerance. And now we're going to use 3 tools to get you from a hypo arousal state, which is like, going from a really low energy state, right, back up and increasing the energy, right? So the first one is mental time travel, right? But it's using a past perspective. And every time I talk about this story, it gets me emotional, right? And it gets me going. But everyone has a grandparent or an uncle or someone they know from their lineage from the past that went through catastrophic events, when they were, I heard about stories of events, right? For myself, it was my dad, grew up in former Yugoslavia, 1947. So 2 years after the Second World War ended, back then it was Yugoslavia, but now it's Croatia. It was completely flattened, right? There was nothing around. And my father was born, and he had 11 brothers and sisters. Half of them didn't even survive infancy, right? He was one of the stronger ones. He lived in a dress for the first 5 years of his life. He used to catch sparrows to feed himself, little birds. They drank wine when they were young because the water was contaminated. That was interesting, but because the fermentation process, obviously got rid of the bacteria, they drank wine. Anyway, he went through such hard times, and he told me this story when I was young, and he wanted a better life. And, most people stayed in the village where he went. He left and he went on a boat to Australia, 3-month trip, and he landed in Australia in 1969. And he had one shoe, he lost a shoe somehow, and he had a suitcase. It was completely empty. And this guy from nothing, couldn't speak English, ended up being from a carpenter to a builder to a very successful, very successful builder, made a lot of money, had properties, and retired well. Worked really hard, but retired well. So you think of someone in your lineage, right, that really gets the hair standing on end. And when I think of my dad, I think, well, if I'm going through a hard time, I think of my dad and I thought, look, if he can do that, if he can go through, not having not knowing where his food will come from, and, not even having water to drink or anything like that, if he can go through that really tough time, and he's part of my lineage and I'm part of my dad and dad's part of me and everything like that, if he can go through it and I'm connected to him, then I've got some of that in me. So surely I can get through a 15-minute, 45-minute trigger. Surely. Of course I can. I'm part of my dad. Right. So this emotion really fuels you. Okay. Um, okay. Now, the next one is the inner coach. The inner coach is distant self-talk, where when you're talking to yourself, you want to be talking to yourself and using your name. So our mind does not know the difference between, when we're talking to someone and when we're talking to ourselves. And a lot of the time, the way we talk to ourselves, we would never talk out loud to other people like that, but we talk to ourselves like that because we're not having such a great time with, trying to get through, you know, trying to drink less or take a reset or be sober, and we keep stuffing up and we talk to ourselves in a very mean way, right? So distance self-talk is all about, when you talk to yourself, you talk to yourself like you're talking to a friend or you're coaching a friend. And from now on, when you are talking to yourself consciously, quietly, internally, you use your name. Ned, you've done harder things before. Keep going. This shifts your brain from helplessness to helpfulness. So you talk to yourself and you can say, I can do this. I can freaking do this. I can do this. Ned, I can do this. So you use your name a lot, right? The last tool is a chatter support. And this is a beautiful thing where if you can find a friend or a mate or a partner and you give them your why, you give them your massive why of your goal of wanting to be, of not having alcohol rule your life, and you want to be, ruling your own life, right? So you figure out what your big why is and you ask yourself 7 times, go 7 levels deep on what your big why is. And then you find a mate and you say, you're my chatter support friend. Whenever I feel down or out and I just want to rant, I just want to get it out because I'm so triggered, I'm going to call you and I just want you to listen. And I just want you to listen. And I just want you to listen. And you just vent. And all your friend has to do is ask you one question. Have you emptied out? No, I haven't emptied out. And you start ranting and raving and saying this happened and this person really ticked me off. And oh my God, I really wanted to have a drink because, I was so overwhelmed and I didn't know what to do. And I didn't go into my toolkit, my stack deck, like Ned said, to practice one of the skills. And I didn't do it. And, I should have, but I didn't. And, all this stuff. And so you're ranting and then you finish. And then your friend says, have you emptied out? And you go, yes. And when you're empty and you empty your vessel, that's when you've got space for your friend to deliver the why, your why, back to you. And it reinforces why you're doing this in the first place. And you will take it more on board because you're emptied out, right? It's very hard to take in information when there's 16 different tabs open on the computer. But when you cross off all those tabs and there's no tabs left and you just want to open up one tab, it's a lot easier to open on one tab and just be focused on one tab. It's a lot easier to take on information and take on information into your vessel when you're completely emptied out. So that was your chatter support. Beautiful technique. So I wanted to show you the stack deck, and this has got 48 different tools, and the way that you work it is the green is for emotion, the black and white is for mindset. These are the contents pages. The yellow is for habits. The purple or maroon is for triggers. Purple is for it's the semantic, is more like changing, shifting states. And the blue is for affirmations. But if we were to go to, say, the RAIN method, right? I mentioned this before. It's number 7, right? So this is it here. This is the RAIN method, and it says here, the RAIN method creates space, right? It's for processing emotions. R stands for recognizing the thoughts, feelings. A is for allowing and accepting them with no judgments. I is for investigating the emotion, just like a child. That's interesting, and just observing it. And N is for nurture and self-compassion. Okay. The other one I was going to show you, for example, was the piggyback method. And this is all about habits, where you use a piggyback method and you find a routine that you are doing already. That's either neutral or that's that's positive, right? And if you want to start a really beautiful new routine, with your health goals, right? You link your new tiny routine and piggyback it onto an old established habit. Okay. And for example, every time I get dressed after a shower, I perform 40 push ups. Or every time I'm waiting for the kettle to boil, I take three deep, nourishing belly breaths. Or every time I make myself a pot of morning brew, I drink some warm lemon water first. Okay. And you can make any habit stick by piggybacking it onto piggyback it onto an established habit. Whenever you brush your teeth, you dry brush your body first. Whenever you see in the morning, when you do get to your phone, before you start looking at your phone, text a friend and tell them that you love them, or that you're grateful to have them in your life. Or, have a sacred space where the first thing you do is you give time to yourself and you journal and you write down 15 different things that you're grateful for the first thing in the morning, and you start to create that habit, that's linked to the morning. So that was the training on tools and techniques. There are a lot of tools and techniques, as you can see, and the best thing to do is to go through it. There are 48 different tools and techniques, and the best thing to do is to go through it. And once you do go through it, you will find that, you will have ones that you gravitate towards, that you will like a lot better than the rest of them. So, yeah, but I'll leave you to it. I've got to go and do a coaching call. But thank you so much. And if you did watch the training, I'd love to get your feedback on what's working for you. But I'll catch you later. Ned Mira signing off. Take care.